They called her the oil change girl, in front of a crowd that wanted to believe him. A wealthy collector rolled a dead beetle into her shop, declared it hopeless since 1998, and made a bet designed to destroy her reputation by sundown. She heard something no one else did, a whisper of electricity buried in decades of contempt and bad wiring. What she found hidden in that car would expose more than faulty circuits. It would strip a man's arrogance bare in front of the same people who had laughed at her. And when that engine finally fired, the silence that followed said everything words couldn't. Subscribe right now and tell me in the comments what city you're watching this from, because what happens next will make you believe in poetic justice. The air compressor hissed in the back corner. Maya Brooks crouched beside a Ford on the lift and checked torque specs on each lug nut. The morning sun cut through the bay doors and painted the concrete in stripes. She worked in silence and moved with economy. Eddie Salazar stood at the front counter and flipped through the day's schedule. His pen tapped the clipboard twice. He frowned at the thin margin between labor hours and payroll. The phone rang, and he grabbed it on the second ring. "Delaney's auto," he said. Maya stood and wiped her hands on a red rag. The Ford was done and tagged for pickup. She heard Eddie's voice change on the phone. He said yes 3 times and wrote something down fast. Eddie hung up and looked at her. "We got a special delivery coming in." "What kind?" Maya asked. "Vintage Beetle. Customer wants the main bay cleared." Maya nodded. She rolled her toolbox to the side wall and started moving the creeper out of the center. Eddie chewed his lip and stared at the work order he had just written. He did not say the customer's name yet. The shop was quiet, except for the tick of cooling metal. Maya felt something shift in the air. Eddie walked to the bay door and looked out at the street. He exhaled slow and turned back to her. "He's rolling up now," Eddie said. The trailer appeared first. It gleamed white and spotless under the noon sun. A black truck pulled it into the lot and stopped with precision. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out in loafers and pressed khakis. Walt Harrington smoothed his polo shirt and walked to the trailer hitch. He moved without hurry. Eddie stepped outside, and Maya followed a few paces behind. Gus Delaney leaned on his broom near the tire rack and watched. Walt unlatched the trailer gate and lowered the ramp. Inside sat a 1972 Beetle in faded blue. Dust covered the windshield, and the chrome bumpers showed rust spots. Walt climbed into the trailer and started the winch. "Careful with her," Walt said. "She's been asleep a long time." Eddie nodded. "How long?" "Since 1998, Walt said. He smiled without warmth. "Haven't heard her run in 27 years. The Beetle rolled down the ramp on flat tires. Walt guided it with one hand and stopped it just inside the bay. Trey Collins appeared from the parts room and stared at the car. A small crowd formed as word spread about the vintage arrival. Walt dusted his hands and looked around the shop. His eyes passed over Maya and stopped on Eddie. "So who's the real mechanic here?" he asked. Eddie's jaw tightened. "Maya Brooks. She's lead diagnostics." Walt turned and studied Maya for the first time. His smile widened. The shop went very still. "The oil change girl?" Walt said. He laughed once and looked at Trey. "You're kidding." Trey shifted his weight and said nothing. Maya felt the heat of eyes on her back. She kept her face neutral and walked to the driver's door. Walt stepped aside but kept smiling. "Ma'am, I need someone who knows old German iron," Walt said, "not someone who rotates tires." Maya opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl cracked under her, and the cabin smelled of mildew. She turned the key without touching the pedals. The dash lights flickered dim and died fast. She listened. The room behind her buzzed with low voices. She closed her eyes and turned the key again. The starter solenoid clicked once. Then she heard it. A faint tick near the dash that nobody else seemed to notice. "Well?" Walt asked. Maya opened her eyes and watched the dash lights dim oddly during the crank. She released the key, and the tick stopped. She turned it again, and the tick returned for half a second. "I need time to run diagnostics," Maya said. Walt crossed his arms. "Diagnostics on a car that's been dead since Clinton was president?" Maya climbed out and faced him. She felt anger, but did not show it. "That's what I do," she said. Eddie cleared his throat. "Maya's the best we have." Walt shook his head slowly. His smile never left. "Here's the deal," Walt said. He raised his voice so the whole shop could hear. "You make this car start by closing time and I'll pay double your rate." Eddie straightened. "And if we can't?" "Then I write a very detailed review online," Walt said. "About how Delaney's couldn't start a lawnmower." Maya felt her stomach drop. Eddie's face drained white. Trey looked at the floor, and Gus gripped his broom tighter. The crowd stirred with nervous energy. "That's not fair," Eddie said. His voice shook. "Fair?" Walt laughed. "I'm offering you a bonus. All you have to do is your job." Maya stepped forward. She looked at Eddie and then at Walt. The room waited. She picked up a clipboard and wrote her name on the work order in clear letters. "I'll take it," Maya said. "Good," Walt said. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. "You've got 6 hours." Maya nodded once. "I'll need the rear seat cleared and access to the battery." Walt waved a hand. "Do whatever you want. Just make it run." Eddie started to speak, but Maya shook her head. She grabbed her multimeter from her toolbox and walked back to the Beetle. The crowd began to thin. Whispers followed them out. The door. Trey lingered near the workbench. Gus swept the same spot 3 times. Eddie stood frozen at the counter with his hands flat on the surface. Maya knelt beside the driver's door and stared at the dashboard. The weight of the bet settled over the shop. Maya pulled the rear seat cushion forward, and it came free with a dusty crack. Brittle wiring loomed behind the seat back. She aimed her flashlight at the battery leads and followed them toward the ignition switch. The insulation had turned gray and showed cracks. She found several splices wrapped in electrical tape that had gone sticky. 2 wires disappeared under the carpet toward the dashboard. A third ran to a small black box tucked against the firewall. The box was held in place with more tape. "What's that?" Trey asked. He stood too close with a parts catalog in his hand. "Not sure yet," Maya said. Trey flipped pages. "I got a high-performance coil that might help. New old stock. Could be the problem." Maya glanced at him. "We test first, then we replace." "But if the coil's weak, then the numbers will show it," Maya said. She held out the multimeter. "Hold this." Trey took it and stood back. Maya traced the black box's wires and found they spliced into the ignition feed. The splices were old and corroded, but still intact. She made a note on her pad. Gus shuffled closer with his broom. He looked at the black box and frowned. "Aftermarket alarm brain," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "Looks like it." "Might still be hot," Gus said. "Might be killing your start circuit." Trey shifted. "Should we just rip it out?" "Not yet," Maya said. She sat back on her heels and planned her next steps. The box could wait. First, she needed to know if the engine could even crank properly. Maya clipped the multimeter leads to the battery terminals. She asked Trey to watch the screen while she turned the key. The voltage dropped from 12.6 to 8.2 during crank. The number made her frown. "That's a lot of drop," Trey said. "Too much," Maya said. She moved the negative lead to the engine block and cranked again. Voltage dropped to 9.1. She moved the lead to the transmission case and cranked a third time. The number jumped to 7.8. "What's that mean?" Trey asked. "Bad ground path," Maya said. She wrote the numbers in her notebook. The engine dragged, and the starter motor groaned like it was pulling too much resistance. The dash lights dimmed more than they should. Eddie appeared at her shoulder. His arms were crossed. "How's it looking?" he asked. "Ground problem," Maya said. "Could be the strap. Could be the chassis." Eddie glanced towards the front window where Walt's truck still sat. "Maya, maybe we should just tell him it's not worth it." "It is worth it," Maya said. "He's going to trash us online either way," Eddie said. His voice was tight. "We can't win." Maya stood and faced him. She felt frustration, but kept her tone level. "I can fix this." Eddie looked at her for a long moment. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She turned back to the Beetle and logged each reading. The afternoon sun moved across the bay floor. Customers came in and whispered near the tire display. Maya ignored them all. Walt returned with a coffee cup in his hand. He walked around the Beetle and sipped slowly. Maya was on her back under the dashboard with a flashlight clamped to the steering column. She traced wires toward the fuse panel. "How's my baby doing?" Walt asked. His tone was light and mocking. Maya did not answer. She found the ignition feed and followed it back toward the black box. The wire ran through a grommet in the firewall and disappeared into the rear compartment. She slid out from under the dash and stood. "Making progress?" Walt asked. "Yes," Maya said. Walt smiled. "Because I've been thinking. This thing had a frame-off restoration in 2005. Powder-coated chassis, stainless fasteners, top-dollar work." Maya looked at him. "Who did the restoration?" "Some shop in Nevada," Walt said. He shrugged. "They went under years ago, but they were supposed to be the best." Maya nodded slowly. She walked to the rear compartment and knelt beside the black box again. She touched the taped wires and felt them crumble slightly under her fingers. The restoration had been expensive, but not complete. "Factory junk always fails," Walt said. "That's why I upgraded everything." Maya pulled the tape away and exposed the alarm brain. 2 relays were mounted inside the housing. One was labeled "Starter Interrupt." The other had no label. She aimed her flashlight at the second relay and listened close. The faint tick came from there. It pulsed once when she turned the key, and then fell silent. Maya marked the relay with a grease pencil and sat back. She had a plan now. Maya clipped a jumper wire across the alarm brain's output terminals. She bypassed the immobilizer circuit completely and returned to the driver's seat. Trey stood beside the open hood and watched the distributor. Eddie hovered near the bay door. Maya turned the key. The engine cranked faster without the voltage drop. The distributor spun and spark jumped at the plug wires. The engine coughed once and fell silent. She cranked again and got the same cough. "It's trying," Trey said. His voice carried hope. Maya released the key and listened. The tick was gone, but the engine still would not fire. She checked fuel delivery at the carburetor and found it weak. The accelerator pump dribbled instead of spraying. She made another note. Walt appeared in the doorway. "That's all you got?" he asked. "A cough?" A few customers laughed. Maya felt heat rise in her chest, but kept her face still. She climbed out of the car and walked to her toolbox. She pulled out a carburetor rebuild kit and a timing light. "I'm not done," Maya said. Walt checked his phone. "You've got 2 hours." Eddie stepped forward. "Maya, we can stop. We can refund his deposit and—" "No," Maya said. She looked at Eddie and then at Walt. I'm going to finish this. Gus swept near the workbench and nodded once. Trey grabbed a creeper and rolled it under the car without being asked. The shop grew quiet again. Maya clipped the work light to the hood and opened the carburetor. The point of no return had passed. There was only forward now. Morning light filled the bay before the shop officially opened. Maya had slept 3 hours in the break room. She returned to the Beetle with fresh eyes and a thermos of coffee. The car sat in the same spot with tools scattered around it. Eddie arrived and found her already running voltage tests. He set down his keys and walked over slowly. His face showed the night's worry. You stayed? He asked. I needed to think, Maya said. Maya, people are talking, Eddie said. They're saying we're going to lose. Let them talk, Maya said. She wrote numbers in her notebook and moved the meter leads to a different ground point. The reading shifted by 0.3 volts. She circled the number twice. The front door opened, and customers began to drift in. They pretended to browse merchandise, but their eyes kept finding the Beetle. Trey showed up early and grabbed a socket set without being told. Gus swept the same corner he always swept. Walt's truck pulled into the lot at 9 sharp. He climbed out with a newspaper under his arm and sunglasses on his face. He walked through the bay like he owned it. Maya did not look up. Still at it? Walt asked. Yes, Maya said. Funny, Walt said. I thought you'd have given up by now. Maya clipped the meter to the starter terminal and cranked the engine. The voltage sagged to 8.9. She made another note. Walt leaned against the workbench and watched her with amusement. You know what I think? Walt asked. I think this car's been dead so long it forgot how to run. Eddie stood near the counter and twisted a pen in his hands. Trey looked between Walt and Maya like a student watching a test he could not pass. The shop felt smaller with Walt in it. Maya finished her test and stood. She looked at Eddie and spoke clearly. I want to keep going. Eddie's shoulders sagged. Are you sure? I'm sure, Maya said. Walt smiled and folded his newspaper. The morning crowd grew larger. Maya reconnected her scope to the coil and watched the dwell pattern during crank. The signal looked weak but present. She moved to the distributor and pulled the cap. The points were pitted and the gap was too wide. She filed the points smooth and set the gap to spec with a feeler gauge. Trey handed her tools as she asked for them. She reinstalled the cap and checked the rotor for cracks. Everything looked tired but functional. Try it now, Maya said. Trey climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine cranked and coughed twice. Spark improved but still fell apart under load. Maya watched, the dash lights dim in a pattern that should not exist. Better, Trey said. He sounded hopeful. Not good enough, Maya said. She pulled the coil wire and tested resistance. The numbers matched spec. She tested voltage at the coil during crank and found it dropped too low. Maybe it is the coil, Trey said. I could grab that new one. The coil's fine, Maya said. The voltage feeding it isn't. She traced the power wire back through the firewall and found it tied into the same circuit as the headlights. The voltage drop suggested the chassis ground was still compromised. She clipped her meter to the transaxle case and cranked again. Resistance jumped to 1.2 ohms under load. Maya stared at the number and replayed everything she knew about powder-coated chassis. The paint acted as an insulator. Without proper star washers to bite through the coating, the ground path would fail. Walt appeared again with a phone in his hand. He took a picture of Maya kneeling beside the engine. For my review, he said, documenting the effort. Maya ignored him. She asked Trey to fetch star washers and a braided ground strap from the parts room. Trey nodded and ran. Gus shuffled over with his broom. He stopped beside Maya and looked at the transaxle case. His eyes were old but sharp. He had seen 50 years of Volkswagens come through shops across 3 states. "Powder coat?" Gus asked quietly. Maya nodded. "Ground's not making it through." Gus leaned on his broom. "I've seen restorers coat the whole pan and forget the washers. Shiny. Useless." Maya stood and brushed dust from her knees. She looked at Gus with new attention. "You think that's it?" "Seen it twice," Gus said. "Both times the car ran like garbage until we scraped paint and added star washers." Maya replayed the voltage numbers in her head. The pattern matched exactly. The transaxle bolted to the chassis through powder coat. The engine bolted to the transaxle. The whole ground path relied on metal-to-metal contact that no longer existed. Trey returned with a braided strap and a handful of washers. Maya took them and knelt beside the transaxle again. She selected a clean spot on the transaxle nose, where the bell housing met the case. "What are you doing?" Walt asked. He stood too close, and his voice carried irritation. "Building a proper ground," Maya said. "The ground's factory," Walt said. "It doesn't need help." Maya did not answer. She grabbed sandpaper and began removing powder coat from a 2-inch circle. The yellow coating came away in dust and revealed bright aluminum underneath. Gus watched with approval. Walt shook his head. "This is cosmetic nonsense," he said. "You're wasting time." Maya sanded until the metal shined. She wiped it clean with brake cleaner and repeated the process on the chassis rail. 2 bright circles marked her work. She positioned the strap between them. Maya bolted one end of the strap to the transaxle with a star washer biting into fresh metal. She torqued the bolt to spec and checked continuity with her meter. The resistance dropped to 0.02 ohms. She nodded once. She moved to the chassis end and repeated the process. Star washer first, then the ring terminal, then the bolt torqued tight. She tested continuity from the engine block to the battery negative and got 0.03 ohms. "That's it," Maya said. She stood and looked at Eddie. "Watch the meter." Eddie took the multimeter and held it where he could see the screen. Maya climbed into the driver's seat. Trey stood at the fender with his hands gripped on the hood edge. Gus leaned his broom against the wall. Walt crossed his arms. "Here we go again," he said. Maya turned the key. The starter spun fast and smooth. The voltage held at 11.8 during crank. The engine turned over 3 times and coughed hard. It almost caught. Then it died. 11.8, Eddie called out. His voice shook with something close to excitement. Trey's eyes went wide. "That's way better." Maya cranked again. The engine coughed twice and stumbled. The exhaust popped once. The fan shroud spun a quarter turn. Then silence. Walt waved a hand dismissively. "Still dead," he said. "Nice try, though." Maya climbed out and walked to the rear of the car. She pulled the air cleaner and looked down the carburetor throat. The accelerator pump still dribbled weakly. Varnish lined the float bowl. "I need to rebuild the carb," Maya said. Eddie checked the wall clock. "You've got 4 hours left." Maya grabbed her carburetor kit. The bay fell quiet except for the sound of tools. Maya disassembled the carburetor on a clean workbench. The float bowl came off with stuck gasket material. Inside, she found brown varnish coating every surface. The needle valve stuck in the closed position. She soaked the parts in carburetor cleaner and scrubbed each passage with a wire brush. The accelerator pump diaphragm had turned hard and cracked. She replaced it with a new one from the kit. The needle and seat came next. Trey watched over her shoulder. "My dad used to rebuild these," he said quietly. Maya glanced at him. "Yeah?" "He said you could tell a mechanic's skill by how they set afloat," Trey said. Maya nodded. She installed the new needle and adjusted the float height with a gauge. She checked it twice to make sure it matched spec exactly. Then she reassembled the carburetor with new gaskets. She carried it back to the engine and bolted it in place. She connected the fuel line and checked for leaks. Nothing dripped. She set the idle screw to baseline and adjusted the choke plate. "Ready?" Maya asked. Eddie stood by with the multimeter still in his hand. Gus had moved closer without being obvious about it. Walt leaned against the doorframe with his phone out. The afternoon crowd had grown. Maya slid into the driver's seat and pumped the gas pedal twice. She turned the key. The starter spun. The engine coughed. Then it caught and ran for 2 full seconds before dying. The sound echoed in the bay. The room exploded with noise. Trey shouted. Eddie's face split into a grin. Gus nodded slowly. Maya felt her heart pound. Then she noticed the faint tick from the dash again. She turned the key off. The tick stopped. She leaned forward and listened. Something was still wrong. Maya climbed out and stood still. The shop buzzed with voices, but she focused on the memory of that tick. It had returned the moment the engine tried to run. She walked to the rear compartment and stared at the black box. She had bypassed the immobilizer circuit. But the tick suggested a second relay still in play. She grabbed her flashlight and traced wires from the alarm brain toward the right rear quarter panel. They disappeared under the carpet. "What now?" Trey asked. "There's another relay," Maya said. Trey frowned. "Where?" Maya pulled the carpet back and found wires running along the inner fender. They connected to a second black box hidden behind the taillight housing. She had missed it in her first inspection. The box was wrapped in electrical tape that had gone brittle. She peeled the tape away carefully. Inside was a relay identical to the one in the alarm brain. The label read, "Backup Interrupt," in faded ink. Maya felt anger and frustration mix. Walt's voice cut through the bay. "What's the holdup now?" Maya did not answer. She studied the relay and traced its wires. One connected to the ignition feed. The other ran to a body ground. The ground wire looked corroded where it met the chassis. "This is taking too long," Walt said. His voice grew louder. "You people don't know what you're doing." Eddie stepped between Walt and Maya. "She knows exactly what she's doing." "Then why isn't it running?" Walt asked. He waved his phone. "I'm starting my review right now. Delaney's Auto, incompetent, dishonest, taking advantage of customers." Eddie's hands balled into fists. Trey looked at the floor. Gus gripped his broom so hard his knuckles went white. Maya felt the room tilt toward disaster. Walt's voice filled every corner of the shop. He paced while he talked. Customers had gathered near the front counter. Some recorded on their phones. Eddie's face flushed red. "You promised results by closing," Walt said. "You promised competence. All I see is guesswork and wasted hours." "We're not guessing," Eddie said. His voice shook. "Maya's been methodical." "Methodical?" Walt laughed. "Is that what you call it when you tear apart a customer's car and can't put it back together?" Trey started to speak, but stopped. Maya felt the weight of every eye in the room. She stood up slowly and faced Walt. Her voice came out calm and clear. "I found a second kill circuit," Maya said. Walt stopped pacing. "What?" "Your restorer installed a backup relay," Maya said. She pointed to the hidden box. "It's still active. It's cutting power to the coil when the engine tries to run." Walt stared at the relay. Then he looked at Maya with something new in his eyes. Not respect, but doubt about his own certainty. "That's impossible," he said. "Nobody told me about a second relay." "They probably forgot," Maya said, "or they went out of business before they documented it." Walt's face shifted through emotions: anger, confusion, fear that he might be wrong. "So fix it," he said. Maya knelt beside the relay and tested voltage at its terminals. The reading confirmed it was still powered. She prepared to bypass it, but noticed the body ground connection looked terrible. Green corrosion covered the ring terminal. "I need to clean this ground too," Maya said. "Then do it," Walt said. But his voice had lost some of its edge. Maya worked in silence. She removed the ground wire and sanded the chassis to bright metal. She cleaned the ring terminal with a wire brush. Then she reinstalled it with a star washer. Maya bridged the hidden relay with a jumper wire. She tested continuity from the coil to the battery and got a clean reading. She tightened the body ground fastener to spec. The dash lights brightened more evenly when she turned the key to accessory. The tick stopped completely. Maya listened to the silence where the tick had been. She felt cautiously optimistic. Eddie moved closer, and Trey crowded in behind him. Gus stood at the edge of the group. "Try it," Eddie said. Maya slid into the driver's seat one more time. She pumped the gas pedal once and turned the key. The starter spun smooth and fast. The engine cranked. It coughed. It stumbled. The fan shroud turned. Then it died. The silence that followed felt crushing. Maya sat frozen with her hand still on the key. She heard Walt's footsteps approaching. The crowd shifted with disappointment. "That's it then," Walt said. "You're out of time and out of ideas." Maya turned the key again. Same result. The engine tried but could not sustain itself. She climbed out and stared at the carburetor. Everything should work. The grounds were solid. The spark was strong. Fuel delivery looked adequate. But something was still wrong. She could feel it in the way the engine died. Not starved, not flooded, just unable to hold itself together. Like a timing issue or an ignition feed that sagged under load. Eddie touched her shoulder. "Maya," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time." Maya shook her head. She walked to her toolbox and grabbed her timing light. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "One more test," she said. The clock on the wall showed 2 hours until closing. The crowd began to thin. Walt stood motionless with his arms crossed. The Beetle sat silent in the center of the bay. Maya clipped the timing light to the #1 plug wire. She asked Trey to start the engine while it would still fire. The strobe flashed, and she watched the timing mark on the pulley. It danced too far advanced. "Kill it," Maya said. Trey shut off the key. Maya loosened the distributor clamp and rotated the housing a fraction clockwise. She tightened it and asked for another attempt. The engine coughed twice and died, but the timing mark had moved closer to spec. She rechecked voltage at the coil during crank. 12 volts steady. She verified dwell after the point settled. 32 degrees? Perfect. The numbers finally matched what the engine needed to run. "Set the idle screw to baseline," Maya told Trey. "Don't touch the coil. Don't touch the distributor." Trey nodded and adjusted the carburetor screw carefully. His hands were steadier than before. Gus watched from his spot near the tool bench. Eddie stood at the bay door and looked out at the parking lot. "People are gathering," Eddie said quietly. Maya glanced up. More cars had pulled into the lot. Word had spread about the challenge. She felt pressure building in her chest but pushed it down. She tested the braided ground strap one more time. Tight, clean, perfect. She walked around the Beetle and checked every connection she had made. The hidden relay was bypassed. The body grounds were clean, the carburetor was rebuilt, the timing was set, the points were gapped, everything was ready. "One more try," Maya said. Trey stepped back from the engine. Gus gripped his broom. Eddie turned away from the window. The afternoon sun slanted through the bay and painted the Beetle in golden light. Maya heard footsteps approaching from outside. Walt Harrington pushed through the door with 3 people behind him. He had brought an audience. Walt's companions wore expensive clothes and carried themselves with confidence. One man had a camera around his neck. A woman held a tablet. They spread out around the bay and studied the Beetle. "Still working on it?" Walt asked. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. Maya stood beside the driver's door. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply waited. Eddie moved to stand beside her. Trey positioned himself near the hood. "This car will never run," Walt said to his friends. "It's been dead 27 years. These people think they can fix it in one day." The woman with the tablet typed something. The man with the camera raised it and took a picture of Maya. She felt anger rise but kept her face neutral. Gus swept slowly toward the group. "You've had your chance," Walt said. "Time to admit defeat." Maya looked at Eddie. He nodded once. She spoke only to him and to the engine. "RPM baseline is 800. Watch for stumble at 1000. Eddie picked up a notebook and wrote it down. Maya slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl creaked. She placed her hand on the key and took a breath. The shop went completely silent. She turned the key. The starter engaged. The engine cranked 4 times. It coughed. It caught. It ran for 3 seconds. Then it died. The crowd exhaled as if proven right. Walt spread his hands. "There you go. Exactly what I expected." Maya sat motionless. She stared at the dashboard and listened to the memory of those 3 seconds. The engine had not starved. It had not flooded. Something had interrupted power at the exact moment the load increased. She climbed out and walked to the rear compartment. She knelt beside the hidden relay again. The jumper wire was in place, but the connection looked loose where it touched the terminal. Maya pulled the jumper wire and examined it closely. The alligator clip had oxidation on the teeth. It had been making contact, but not solid contact. She grabbed a wire brush and cleaned both the clip and the relay terminal. She also checked the bypass she had made on the first alarm brain. That connection looked better, but she cleaned it anyway. Then she returned to the body ground behind the taillight and retorqued the fastener. It had loosened slightly from vibration. "What are you doing?" Walt asked. "Making sure," Maya said. She traced the ignition feed one more time and found a micro delay in the circuit during crank. The power came through, but took a fraction too long to stabilize. She adjusted the bypass on the hidden relay to eliminate the delay completely. Trey crouched beside her. "You think that's it?" he whispered. "I hope so," Maya said. She stood and walked back to the braided strap. She checked its bite into the bare steel on both ends. Everything was tight. She clipped her meter to the coil and watched the voltage during accessory. Steady. No sag. Eddie appeared at her side. "Maya, you don't have to keep going." She looked at him. She saw worry in his eyes, but she also saw belief. "We're one correction away," she said. "How do you know?" Eddie asked. "Because I've eliminated everything else," Maya said. She walked to the driver's door and looked at Walt. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set. His friends watched with amused expressions. The cameraman raised his lens again. Maya slid into the seat. She placed both hands on the steering wheel and stared at the key. She thought about every wire she had traced, every ground she had cleaned, every number she had logged. She turned the key. The starter groaned once and caught rhythm. The engine cranked smooth and fast. The flat force sputtered. It coughed. It stumbled. Then the idle steadied at 850 RPM. The sound filled the bay clear and strong. Maya held the throttle with her right foot and watched the tach needle settle. The engine did not hunt. It did not miss. It simply ran. She felt tears threaten but blinked them back. She eased off the throttle and the idle dropped to spec. Trey shouted and punched the air. Eddie's mouth fell open. Gus closed his eyes and nodded slowly. The crowd turned toward Walt, as if waiting for him to speak. He stood frozen with his face gone pale. Maya blipped the throttle twice. The engine responded clean and immediate. She watched the vacuum gauge on the workbench. The needle held steady at 16 inches. Perfect. She let the engine idle and climbed out. 11.9 volts at the coil, Eddie called out. He stared at the multimeter like it held magic. Steady under load. The Beetle's exhaust note was rough, but even. The fan shroud spun with a rhythmic whoosh. Oil pressure climbed on the dash gauge. The cooling fins ticked as they warmed. Maya stood beside the open door and listened to proof. Walt's friends shifted uncomfortably. The woman with the tablet looked at Walt and then at her screen. The cameraman lowered his lens. Walt himself seemed unable to move or speak. How did you... Walt started. Then he stopped. Maya walked to the workbench and picked up her notebook. She carried it to Eddie and handed it to him. Invoice everything, she said quietly. By the hour, with diagnostics detailed. Eddie took the notebook. His hands shook slightly. You did it, he said. Maya nodded once. The Beetle idled behind her, steady and undeniable. Walt finally found his voice. He stepped toward the Beetle and pointed at the engine. I knew it was a wiring issue, he said. I suspected it all along. Gus moved faster than anyone expected. He walked to the workbench and picked up Maya's notes. He held them up so the room could see. She diagnosed 2 immobilizer circuits, Gus said. A powder-coated chassis killing grounds, and a buried relay nobody documented. Walt's face flushed. Well, yes, but... She found all of it, Gus said. His voice was sharp and clear. While you mocked her. Nora Kim appeared in the bay doorway. She had come back for her patched tire. She held her phone up and the red recording light showed. I'm getting this, she said. The shop listened to the Beetle's even thrum. Maya watched the crowd and saw their expressions change. Doubt turned to attention. Skepticism turned to respect. Walt stood alone in the center of his own silence. Eddie printed an invoice from the computer. He brought it to Walt and held it out. Diagnostics are itemized, Eddie said. 8 hours labor, parts, and the bonus you promised for making it run. Walt stared at the paper. His jaw worked, but no sound came. His friends had already backed toward the door. The woman with the tablet typed furiously. The cameraman took one more picture of the running Beetle. That's a lot, Walt said weakly. That's the price of being wrong, Eddie said. Nora stepped closer with her phone still recording. I'd like to hear what the mechanic has to say, she said. She looked at Maya. Can you explain what you found? Maya hesitated. Then she nodded. The room leaned in to listen. Maya walked to the rear compartment and pointed to the first alarm brain. Her voice stayed calm and factual. This immobilizer was installed during a restoration. It cuts power to the starter circuit when triggered. She moved to the hidden relay behind the tail light. This backup circuit was added as a failsafe. It remained active even after the alarm was disabled. It interrupted the coil feed every time the engine tried to run. Nora's phone followed Maya's hands. Trey stood beside the fender and nodded along. Gus leaned on his broom with visible pride. Walt shifted his weight and looked at the floor. The powder-coated chassis blocked the ground path, Maya continued. She knelt beside the braided strap. The restoration looked good, but forgot proper star washers. The engine had voltage, but nowhere for current to return. She stood and walked to the driver's seat. I bypassed both kill circuits. I built a dedicated ground. I cleaned every connection. The engine can run now because electricity can flow properly. The idle remained steady at 850. No miss, no stumble, just clean combustion. Maya invited anyone to come closer and listen to the difference in the starter draw now. Several people stepped forward. Trey cleared his throat. Could I reinstall a proper immobilizer? He asked. Under your supervision? Maya looked at him. She saw earnestness where swagger had been. Yes, she said. We'll do it right this time. Walt finally spoke. His voice came out flat. I didn't know about the second relay. No, Maya said. But you assumed incompetence before you asked questions. Nora stopped recording and lowered her phone. Thank you for the lesson, she said to Maya. In listening. The shop fell quiet except for the Beetle's engine. Walt pulled out his wallet. Customers began to clap. It started with one person near the tire rack. Then Nora joined. Then others. The sound built until it filled the bay. Maya felt heat in her face, but stood still and let it happen. Eddie's shoulders dropped for the first time all day. He smiled and shook his head slowly. Trey clapped so hard his hands turned red. Gus wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand and called out over the noise. Best ear in 3 counties, Gus said. His voice cracked slightly. I've worked with hundreds of techs. She's the best. The clapping continued. Walt signed the invoice without speaking. He wrote a check and handed it to Eddie. His friends had disappeared. He walked to the Beetle and looked at it running. I was wrong, Walt said quietly. Only Maya and Eddie heard him. About you. Maya nodded once. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply accepted the acknowledgement. Walt climbed into his truck and drove away. The crowd stayed. Nora approached Maya and held out her hand. Maya shook it. Can I post this video? Nora asked. People should see what real competence looks like. If you want, Maya said. Eddie totaled the invoice and stared at the number. The diagnostic work had earned more than the shop usually made in 2 days. He looked at Maya with something close to awe. You saved us, he said. I just did the work, Maya said. Trey asked if he could help reinstall the immobilizer correctly. Maya agreed and pulled up a wiring diagram. Gus swept the bay with renewed purpose. The Beetle continued to idle smooth and strong. A short line formed, near the counter. New customers. They had heard about the challenge and wanted diagnostics from the mechanic who had won. 3 weeks passed. The Beetle rolled out under its own power on a Thursday morning. Walt had returned twice for follow-up work. He spoke to Maya with careful respect each time. She treated him fairly and charged what the labor was worth. Eddie hung a small placard near the bay door. It read, Brooks Diagnostics, we hear what others don't. Maya saw it and shook her head, but did not ask him to remove it. Customers mentioned it when they came in. Trey rewired the immobilizer under Maya's supervision. He asked questions and took notes. He stopped guessing and started measuring. His work improved each day. Maya assigned him more complex diagnostics, and he rose to meet them. Gus stopped sweeping and started consulting on vintage electrical systems. He stood at the workbench and traced circuits while younger techs listened. His pride returned with his purpose. The shop felt different with him teaching again. Nora's video reached 10,000 views. Comments praised Maya's patience and skill. New customers arrived from neighboring towns. Eddie hired a second tech to handle the overflow. The insurance payment came through on time for once. Maya stood in the bay at closing time and watched the last customer drive away. The compressor hissed in the back corner. The sun cut through the door in stripes. She wiped her hands on a red rag and walked to her toolbox. Trey approached with a work order. "Got a no-start coming in tomorrow," he said. "Want me to start diagnostics or wait for you?" "Start," Maya said. "I'll check your work." Trey nodded and smiled. He walked to the front counter and wrote notes. Gus locked the parts room and waved goodnight. Eddie counted the register and looked at Maya with gratitude he did not need to speak. The bay grew quiet. Maya turned off the work light. She listened to engines cooling and felt respect warming the room. She had earned this, every bit of it.